I'm in a mostly empty package.json file. I'm going to add a dependency on 11y. And I'm going to say use the 3.0 stuff that has all the great ESM, install the run npm install, and then put a couple of scripts that will give me a dev server for start that will serve up the dev server in incremental mode and a build. Next up, I need to, this 11y, not much to do to get set up, but one of those things is to make a new file, 11y.config.js. Close this window. I will paste in a little bit of normal 11y stuff. My site's going to be in site. It's going to generate its build into undersite. And so I need to create some content. I will make a file at site index.11y.javascript. So this is a template because it has .11y on it. It's a JavaScript template. It's not Markdown. It's not Liquid or anything like that. So it basically has a single function and named export called render. That's the protocol. I'm just going to return a string. And with that in place, I can run the 11y server. So I'll go back to package.json, run the dev server. And we see we generated one file. It's at 8081, hello ESM. I'll make my IDE happy by going back to, I take that back, I didn't actually show the browser opening up on this screen. It's on a different screen, so I did get to see the output. Then I'll go back and make my IDE happy by right-clicking, mark directory as excluded. I'll do it again, cancel that exclusion. So mark directory as excluded so that it doesn't index the built output and then leave me over there for autocomplete. That is the minimal getting started for 11y. We haven't done any of the good stuff yet. That'll be next. Let's take a jump into TypeScript as part of our 11y development experience. First, we're going to do a tsconfig.json file. Gotta admit, I never understand these things. So many wires to wiggle. So I'm just going to cut and paste this. These two are pretty important about choosing the module system that we're going to use. Next up, we'll go back to package.json. We'll add a build dependency on the star of the show, this package called TSX. It is kind of a wrapper for ESBuild, which you may have heard of. And it lets us basically replace the node executable. So instead of running node or npx or something like this, you first run this and it will transparently transpile TypeScript, JSX, and TSX, and all these other default settings so you don't have to understand, because I don't understand. With that in mind, I'm going to want to change my two scripts to then use this new world. And this new world says, I'm going to run this TSX command, point it at executing this command runner from 11y, and then my start will be pointed at a config file, which is in, you guessed it, TypeScript instead of JavaScript, and everything else is basically the same. So I need to come over to my 11y config file, I'm going to rename it to TS, and I'm going to go open it. I'm not going to do too much in here. Basically, I'm going to ask for the 11y config, and 11y doesn't have any typing on it, so I'll just say any. We'll revisit this part with 11y config in just a second. We'll rename our template, which is the basic content for our site. We will get it to be renamed to TS TypeScript. Excellent. I'll go into it and I will put a little bit of typing on this template. I will get it to return a string. Other than that, I'm not going to make any changes to this. When I restart my dev server, what happens? Womp womp, 0 files. Because I haven't taught 11y that .ts is a valid extension. I'm going to go back to my 11y config file. This is why I put in the passing in the 11y config object, because I want to now wire 11 up to say, hey, if you see these extensions, count those the same as if you saw that. And therefore trigger the JavaScript template language that's built into 11, remembering that that TSX package that we added is going to step in before any of this happens and convert TypeScript and TSX into plain old JavaScript stuff. Now, when we restart the server, I see that I did write a file. Did I? Yes, I did. All looks good in the world. But we're just doing TypeScript. We're not doing JSX, TSX. That's the next step. TypeScript has some support for talking to JSX, TSX. The TSX package says it can handle this, but we still need one more thing. We need something to do the actual rendering of JSX into strings server side. That's where a package comes in, JSX async runtime. That's what we'll hook up in this step. So first, what I will do is I'll go to package.json and I will add a dev dependency. Actually, I'll add as a dependency. This package does a lot that we really like. We had previously been using a package called vhtml, didn't have async support. It had been abandoned, and it made us do import H in all of our TSX files. And as soon as we did that, the IDE got mad because we had an unused symbol. This package is maintained, it's working wonderfully, and it renders your VDOM to a string server side as part of the 11 build. So with that in place, we need to go and tell TypeScript, because it has support for this stuff, tell TypeScript that we have JSX and we want to use the knobs that come from React JSX. These are a bunch of settings that wind up happening. And then JSX import source, this is the knob that lets us not have to import H. You just have to tell the compiler what is the name of the package that provides a named export for your H function. Like 4 or 5 or 6 other things that are in that protocol, but that's the one I'm interested in the most. So JSX runtime, with this in place, I don't have to import H all over the place. I'll go back to my index, my one page in my site, and I'm going to return, instead of a string, I'm going to return. And look, even though I didn't import JSX, it's in my namespace. TypeScript knows how to discover these things because of the tsconfig that I just did. And now I don't return a string anymore. I return a JSX element. Oh, and that was why it was being a little bit weird, because I didn't say TSX. Now with that in place, again, I get autocomplete, etc. Now, you would think, hey, cool, look, I didn't even have to import H. This all just looks great. What would happen if I just ran this? Well, alas, when I run it, 11 says, hey man, I don't know what you're doing, but you're not giving me a string. You're giving me an object. You're right, I am giving you an object. So how could I, without having to do anything in every one of my templates, what if I had a plug point where I could tell 11, hey, when you get JSX back, convert it to a string using this function? Indeed, we do. We will go in an 11 config file, and there's a plug point for adding transforms. And this is the heart of the matter. I will add a transform whenever it sees a TSX thing. It's going to be past the content. The content is a JSX element. In this case, I think I wonder if I should do that. I'll give that a try. Since it's a JSX element, we need to convert it to a string using render to string from JSX runtime and then return it. And so that we don't have to put dot types all over the place, we will centralize that decision. Now, when I run the build, I see that I get a site again. Let's run it this time under the debugger and confirm that we're getting handed a JSX element. Look at that. We are getting handed a JSX element. So that is a VDOM kind of thing. There you go. I'm not sure if that's a JSX element. I won't think too much about that right now. So with this in place, we have a site that builds using templates that are not just TypeScript, but TSX. And up next, we want a better development experience instead of going over to the browser all the time. I'm always looking for a better development experience. I like thinking in terms of components. I like staying in the IDE, staying in the flow. Really don't like console.log back and forth all over the place, trying to figure out what's where. In this step, we're going to switch our development to use Vitest so we can stay in the IDE. Here's my package.json. So I'm going to go and get some more dependencies. You know what I should have done earlier? I'm going to put in prettier. And I'll go ahead and put in Vitest at the most recent version. npm install these. Go tell my IDE to use prettier all the time. I'm going to use prettier whenever I save. So it's all transparent. All right, with that in place, next up I need to configure Vitest. Guess what? It has a config file that you put at the root. Can never get enough config files at the root, am I right? This config file imports a base configuration, and then we need to give it some ESBuild information that is unique to the testing process, and then tell it where to go look for tests. So for now, I'm only going to look in the site for anything. This is a file name that says I'm a test. With this in place, I can go write a test for the one piece of content that I have, the index. So I'll go back to index. I'll make a new file here. Index.test.tsx, not TypeScript, but TSX. And I'll just kind of show you, instead of cutting and pasting this time, I'll show you kind of the workflow. So I'm going to make a new test that it should render index. I'll make this an async arrow function. And I'm going to get a result of my component. Oh, apologies. I'm going to refactor this a little bit so that the name render doesn't appear in every single one of my files. Or it does, but it's not the symbol that I will be jumping to. So I'll say index, and then I'll come down here to obey the 11D protocol. I will export const render, not redneck, render equals index. So with that in place, I can come back over to my test and I can say index. Now I got to make a string out of it so I can do an assertion. So I'll say rendered equals await render to string of result. You know what? Here we go. Nope, I need render to string. Yes. And I'll leave that as result. And then I will make an assertion. I will expect rendered. Oh, I need to generate that import. Expect rendered to equal h1 hello TSX. Since I am now in the world of Node.js and my IDE, I don't have to go back to the browser all the time to see what I'm rendering. I can walk up to this one test, run it, and it's like, hey, no, you don't have the right thing. Okay, well, I will go find this, and I will fix this to say TSX. Now when I run the test, I do have the right thing. Let me go back to my package.json, and for people that need something that isn't the IDE, I will add an npm script test that says Vitest run. This is also a convenient way for me to walk up and run all of the tests in the site instead of walking up to just a single test. So that's good. We are rendering components, component-driven development in a test, not going to the browser all the time, but we're working with strings. How can we get a browser without using the browser? Some of you coming from the world of React and Friends may know about JS DOM and its more modern equivalent Happy DOM as fake browsers implemented in Node that you can use in your testing. In this step, we're going to wire up Happy DOM and testing library so that we can write assertions that pick just the thing we want to test. We need to add some dependencies. First, I'm going to add testing library. More specifically, I'm going to add DOM, most recent version. And I'm also going to add, and the testing library is a really cool way to do your development. You're testing your site the way your users use them, accessibility oriented, roles and things like that. And I need to install Happy DOM. And this is my fake browser that's implemented in Node.js so I can stay in my IDE, stay in the flow, not jumping around all over the place. Next, I need to go tell Vitest in its config file that, hey, I've got Happy DOM wired up as the environment that we want to use. And look, it actually has autocomplete for it because this is first-class support in Vitest for these fake browsers implemented in Node. I'll go back to my test. And what I want to do is, instead of asserting that a string has that string content, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take the rendered result and I'm going to put it in document. So now we have an actual DOM that I can enter HTML and assign rendered to. And then I can expect, and I can start using that fake DOM with testing library. Testing library has screen and get by text. I can get my import right on the screen. And I want to tell testing library to go look for hello TSX, meaning any node that has that as the text content of the node. And I just expect it to exist, meaning that it can be found. And I'll simplify this a little bit and not have an extra assignment. Now when I run this test, the test passes. It's a lot easier and gives me a lot richer kind of assertions that I can do accessibility oriented using testing library. For those of you that might be thinking, hey, I could use Playwright or Selenium. Yes, you can, but my goodness, you're cranking up Chromium behind the scenes and you can't really get into setting breakpoints because you're crossed out of one runtime into the other. This becomes a really great way to work. We've added TypeScript, we've added TSX, we've added Vitest. We aren't yet doing components and component-driven development. In this step, we're going to change our 11D templates to have components that are reusable functions in isolation to streamline our developer experience. I'll start by adding a directory to put my components in. And with that in place, what I want is to teach all the pieces so far that components exist so you can look there for things. Vitest needs to be able to look for tests in components. So I added that to the includes. The tsconfig file needs to know, hey, I've got stuff over there. So let's go ahead and be explicit about where I'm going to look for and not look for TypeScript stuff. With this in place, we will make our first component. I will go to the components directory. I'll make a new file, heading.tsx. It doesn't need the .11 in it because this is not part of the 11 contract. And I'll go ahead and type this out instead of pasting it all. The first thing I want to do is the props. And the contract is an optional name of a string. For those of you who do React, this looks familiar, but remember, we're not using React. We're rendering everything server-side. I'm going to make a reusable component called heading. It's going to return a JSX element. And I'm going to say return h1 hello name. So again, I'm going to destructure name from the past in props. It can be optional. If it's since it's optional, I need to put in a default value, and then we're going to return the results. Well, already broke the rules. Should have done test-driven development and write a failing test first. So now I'll go ahead and write my test. This one I will cut and paste because I'm testing both variations of this. I'm testing that the default works without passing in a prop, and it works when you do pass in a prop. When I run, very good developer experience, nice isolation, using a fake browser called HappyDOM. Everything is great, really nice way to work. Didn't have to run the 11 build and go look for console logs all over the place. In fact, you can go even further on this. This is the way that I work. I put the code on the right, on the left. I put the test on the right, and I run actually in two different ways. First, I edit this, and I tell Vitest to run in watch mode. And second, I run under the debugger. So it comes up in its long-running mode. And if I change this to JSX and hit save, I immediately fail. Put it back, it works. And this is such a speedy turnaround type of mode for development, but it's not just for finding bugs or making sure you didn't make a mistake. I use it for exploration. A lot of times 11 passes me something that I don't know what it is, and I don't want to go read through all the docs to figure it out. So what I do is, since I'm running in, actually what I'll show you what I'm really doing is I sit at the top and I run this, which automatically puts me into that watch, but I actually run it under the debug mode. So I got everything in my site is always running. And whenever I want to go exploring, I put a breakpoint and I press space and I stop right there and I can see what is passed to me. And then the next time world is passed to me. And I do this even under full 11 development so that I can see what I'm receiving. A really productive way to work. Component-driven development, Vitest, watch mode, under the debugger, TDD, code on the left, test on the right, test runner at the bottom. That's better development velocity with reusable components and component-driven development. What can we do in our 11 development to embrace everything we've shown thus far? In this step, we are going to introduce the idea of a view that mediates the 11 universe from your development. 11 doesn't ship with typing, so I'm going to go up to the root and create my own kind of typing. Paste in some stuff in there. I'm going to introduce this idea called a view, and it's part of the contract of what 11 will pass you. And as for the shape of it, for now, I'm just going to say that there's a page object that has one thing in it. So when I go back to my 11 template, I'm going to refactor this to split out the part I don't control, the 11 side, from my side. And my side will have a contract that says, here's what I expect. So with this in place, I will write a render function that does this instead. And I will think of this as the view, as the 11 view that mediates between the outside 11 world and my stuff. So my component now can have its own props and its own contract that says this is the only thing that I care about. And this page only needs one thing. It only depends on one thing from the outside world, one piece of data from 11, which is the file path stem. And so that is the contract for this template. And you see that it also uses heading, a reusable component, which I previously wrote. This improves development in many ways, particularly for our tests. I'll paste in what the tests now look like. And you won't really have to write this very often once you get your typing right, because you'll be able to get all of your stuff from the outside world. And then this is what you'll be writing the most, a test just of your component that it receives only the information that it expects. Let's run this. I'll run all the tests in this file. And my test passed, so I have introduced the idea of views into 11 so that my stuff can be separated from the outside world of 11. 11 has a concept called layouts, templates that apply to large parts of your site so you don't have to repeat the same basic information all over the place. We just looked at views. Let's introduce layouts into how we're doing this component-driven development. I'll start by creating a directory. We'll call it under layouts so that we match 11's jargon for this. And I'll go ahead and write a layout in here. I'll make a layout and I'll type it from scratch, main layout. It does need to have the .11 because it's part of the protocol. And I'll go ahead and write this from scratch so we can see the assistance we get once we move into this world of tooling and IDEs. So I'm going to export a function. It's going to look like a component. So main layout. And it's going to be given, and I'll destructure this, content and title. And I'm going to say that it has something called view props, which we will get from the 11e.ts, and I will change this to be the new contract. The new contract is, instead of this, it's going to be every layout expects to have every view expects to have a string and a title. And now I can import that. And it's going to return a JSX element. I'll go ahead and start returning that JSX element. Let's see, HTML head title. And oh yeah, that needs lang equals ing. And the title is going to be the title. I get all the typing. I get all of the typing assistance, except it's a little weird when it matches an element name. And then for the body, I'm going to say body and content, but before content, I'm going to use my heading thing. So I'm going to put in a component, and the name is going to be title. So we're now returning a JSX element, the JSX element. It expects two things from every view that wants to use this layout. The contract is the view needs to hand over a title, view needs to hand over some content. We also need to go, we've introduced a new directory, so we got to go teach our tooling where things are. So tsconfig needs to add layouts. Needs to add layouts here. I'll put it as the last one. get some autocomplete on that. Vitest, because we're going to have tests in these things. Vitest needs to look in layouts. I'll copy and paste that one. Now let's get our test in place. And what I'll do is I'll basically steal this index test. I'll move it over to layouts, and then I will rename it to have the name of the thing we're testing, main layout. Open it. It will be a little bit different, so I will cut and paste this one. We're going to render a main layout, and we're going to provide it a content and a title. We're going to get a result, and then we're going to render it, and then we're going to assign the rendered string to the document body so that we can then use testing library in very rich ways without having to go to the browser and click the universe every time we do stuff. Let's see if my main layout works. My main layout does work. Good. Piece by piece, I'm making my way. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to switch to Markdown. So I'm going to come over to my site. I'm going to make a new file, index.md. I'm going to go delete the old one. And if you're an 11 user, this is familiar to you. You have your front matter. So this is the title that will go to the layout. This is the content that will go to the layout. And I'm choosing what layout to use, main layout in 11d.tsx. Let's see if our site builds. I'll go back to package.json and run my start script. And we have an error because I didn't configure 11d correctly with under layouts. So down here in dir, I need to make the change to include layouts. And when I do, all the pieces are wired together. No, they're not. Because I made that mistake I talked about before on the 11d protocol, that you need to export something called render when you're being a JavaScript template. So with that in place, my site does build correctly now. I can confirm it by clicking on the link. And I see, hello, my site with the content that I was expecting. As a little bit of wrap up, we could convert this to a plugin that did most of the wiring up for you. There's not too much wiring to do, but this is a change in development style. It's for bigger projects with lots of people, for people who want the most out of their tooling without having to switch over to the SPA universe of React and things like this. We've used it. We're pretty happy with the development flow on it. Still more that we can do, but this is a good snapshot of where we're at, and we hope you enjoy it.